At the Hunter Association in Korea, tension choked the air outside the association building. A middle-aged hunter had just exited after receiving his evaluation. He had been promoted to B rank, a major milestone. Pride swelled in his chest, but he reminded himself to stay careful. This was not the time to grow arrogant. As he walked away from the building, someone collided hard with his shoulder. He froze immediately and spun around. A figure stood there, massive, towering, impossibly tall. The hunter's breath hitched as he looked up. The man was nearly 7 feet tall and radiating an unsettling, animalistic aura. The man didn't say a word. His eyes, cold, emotionless, like a predator inspecting prey, slowly lowered to the B-rank hunter who had bumped into him. The hunter felt his breath hitch in his throat. Every instinct inside him screamed danger. A faint trembling spread through the crowd. People stared, whispered, and pulled out their phones, unsure whether they were witnessing the start of a fight or something far worse. Before the hunter could apologize, the giant took a single step forward. That one step was enough. The B-rank hunter felt a suffocating pressure wash over him. Dense, crushing magic power that made his legs almost buckle. He swallowed hard, sweat trickling down the back of his neck. What kind of monster is this? The B-rank hunter, drunk on the pride of his recent promotion, stepped forward and shouted at the towering figure. He remembered his rise through the ranks, how he had once been stepped on and ignored. But not anymore. As a B-rank hunter, he believed he deserved respect, demanded it. His voice rose, fueled by ego and a false sense of power. He never got to finish. The giant moved. Its mouth stretched open, unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged, shark-like teeth. Its eyes burned a deep, murderous red. The aura it released was not just threatening, it was primal, instinctual, a terror so raw that everyone who felt it froze, their souls seized by fear. And then, in one horrific instant, the creature devoured the B-rank hunter whole. Blood splattered the pavement. Flesh tore. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the Beast Monarch grinned, blood dripping down his chin like crimson paint. Chaos erupted. He swept his arm and cars flew like toys, smashing into buildings and crashing onto the street. One nearby hunter looked up just in time to see a car hurtling toward him. He had no chance to defend himself. The impact obliterated him instantly. The Beast Monarch unleashed a deafening roar, raw power vibrating through the air. His voice was monstrous, the language unrecognizable, but the meaning was painfully clear. A declaration of slaughter. He was the king of beasts, and the hunt had begun. Back in Seoul, tension crackled through the Hunter Association. President Woo Jin-chul leaned over the briefing table, jaw clenched. Reports had just come in. A monstrous creature had appeared downtown, attacking without provocation. Casualties were mounting, and the rampage showed no signs of slowing. With a major dungeon break only hours away, the timing couldn't be worse. Frustration tightened Jin-chul's expression as he demanded updates. No one had been able to contact Jin Woo, and the situation was spiraling. If things continued to escalate, he might be forced to confront the beast himself. Just then, the door burst open. An employee rushed in, breathless, announcing that a high-level hunter had arrived on the scene, someone strong enough to face the monster. Jin-chul's heart leapt. Jinwoo? But no, it wasn't him. Instead, a world-class hunter, one who just happened to be nearby, had stepped forward to challenge the Beast Monarch. Leonard Neerman, Germany's strongest hunter, stood his ground as the monstrous aura approached, thick with the stench of blood. Each footstep of the creature sent vibrations crawling across the pavement. For the first time in a long while, doubt gnawed at him. Could he truly face something like this? A small, unwelcome thought whispered in the back of his mind. Is this where I die? He forced the idea down. No, this wasn't coincidence. Something as terrifying as this Beast Monarch appearing in Seoul, and him, a world-class hunter, being here at the exact same moment? It felt like fate had dragged him into this city for a reason. Perhaps to stop this massacre. Perhaps to buy the world a little more time. Jaw clenched, Leonard slowly unbuttoned the top of his shirt, muscles tightening as he prepared to unleash everything he had. He took one step toward the monstrosity, when a deep, commanding voice echoed from behind him. Stop! Thomas finally turned to stare at him directly. A heavy silence fell. I'm not telling you to stand down because you're weak, Thomas said. I'm telling you to stand down because. Far from the turmoil surrounding Seoul, the morning began in perfect calm. Sunlight filtered gently into a quiet restaurant where a steaming breakfast had just been served. For a fleeting moment, the world felt at peace. Then Jinwoo's phone began to ring. It didn't stop. The sharp vibration shattered the stillness. Jin Woo picked up immediately. On the other end was Woo Jinchul, head of the Korean Hunter Association, his voice strained with urgency. A monster had appeared in the heart of Seoul, and it was destroying everything in its path. Jin Woo frowned. That was impossible. The massive gate looming over the city wasn't due to break for several more days. But Jinchul insisted. This wasn't a dungeon break. A single creature had emerged and was wiping out entire forces. One guild had already been obliterated in an instant. This wasn't normal. Jinwoo's thoughts sharpened. He had left shadow soldiers stationed across Seoul, embedded with hunters to report even the slightest disturbance. Yet he had received nothing. No signal. No warning. He reached out to them. The connection was faint, distorted, as though something was deliberately suppressing it. Without hesitation, Jinwoo activated Shadow Exchange, attempting to swap places with the soldier stationed near Thomas Andre. A notification flashed before him. The designated shadow soldier could not be found. He tried again. The same result. A cold realization crept into his mind. An enemy powerful enough to erase his shadows, and Thomas Andre, a world-class hunter, was already facing it. Something was terribly wrong. Jinwoo asked one final question, his voice steady but edged with dread. Does the monster have a shadow? After checking a photograph, Jinchul gave his answer. No. That confirmed it. The creature had hidden itself from the gaze of the shadows. It existed beyond their sight. Elsewhere, Leonard watched as Thomas Andre advanced toward the devastation. His towering frame cast a long shadow across the ruined street, his presence alone commanding awe from the surrounding hunters. They recognized him instantly, a legend among legends. Thomas wasted no time. With calm authority, he ordered the nearby hunters to evacuate civilians immediately. His eyes then shifted toward the creature ahead. It resembled a man, but only vaguely. Its body was drenched in blood, its aura alien and suffocating. An otherworldly predator. Thomas's expression hardened as he stepped forward. Suddenly, the Beast Monarch, Rakan, moved. His claws sliced through the air in a lethal arc aimed directly at Thomas's chest. The impact rang out as steel-like talons scraped across flesh, but Thomas did not falter. He didn't even flinch. In the next instant, boom, Thomas's fist shot forward like a cannon. The punch connected with crushing force, snapping Rakan's head violently to the side. The shockwave tore through the Beast Monarch's body, rippling outward as the battlefield trembled from the impact. The true battle had begun. Thomas didn't hesitate. He drove forward with another earth-shattering punch, but a crooked smile tugged at Rakan's lips, as if he welcomed the violence. Thomas pressed on, swinging again. This time the Beast Monarch twisted aside at the last possible instant, the blow grazing past him. Undeterred, Thomas pivoted and unleashed yet another crushing strike, hammering Rakan straight into the ground. The earth split beneath the impact, asphalt fracturing as debris erupted outward in every direction. The battlefield itself seemed unable to withstand the force of their clash. As the two titans collided again and again, Choi Jong-in, guildmaster of the Hunters Guild, arrived at the scene. Stepping out of his car, flames flickered faintly at his fingertips as his sharp eyes surveyed the destruction. Evacuation efforts were already underway. Hunters from the Fiend Guild and the White Tiger Guild were clearing civilians from danger. But Jong-in's focus locked onto the fight. Something felt wrong. The creature's presence stirred a memory, an overwhelming pressure he hadn't felt since the Jeju Island raid. Even with Thomas Andre, one of the strongest hunters in the world, dominating the exchange, Jong-in couldn't shake the unease tightening in his chest. What exactly were they facing? Meanwhile, Thomas continued his relentless barrage. Each blow drove Rakan backward, forcing the Beast Monarch to yield ground step by step. Then, with a full-powered swing, Thomas delivered a devastating punch that sent Rakan hurtling across the asphalt. The road ripped apart beneath him as he skidded violently, finally crashing into a nearby building in a storm of shattered concrete. For a split second, silence. Then, metal fragments shot out from the dust cloud like bullets. Through the swirling debris, Rockin burst forth at blinding speed, charging straight at Thomas. In an instant, he slammed his head into Thomas's torso with brutal force. But Thomas did not budge. He planted his foot firmly into the fractured earth, absorbing the impact. In the same motion, he seized Rockin by the waist. With raw, monstrous strength, Thomas lifted the Beast Monarch high and executed a thunderous suplex, driving Rockin's head straight into the ground. The shockwave cracked the earth wide open, the impact echoing like an explosion. Yet Rockin was far from finished. In a flash, he retaliated, his leg snapping upward in a vicious kick that connected squarely with Thomas's face. The force launched Thomas skyward like a missile. Rockin landed lightly on his feet, dust settling around him as a savage grin spread across his blood-stained face. Thomas descended moments later, landing solidly on the broken pavement. His eyes never left his opponent. Rockin, the Goliath, activated his reinforcement skill. Power surged through his massive frame, muscles tightening, aura intensifying as the air around him trembled. The next round was about to begin. From a distance, Jinwoo, leader of the White Tiger Guild, watched the titanic confrontation unfold. His sharp gaze hardened as realization struck him. This was it. The subjugation site they had been preparing for had arrived far sooner, and far more violently, than anyone had expected. Rockin's body came crashing down near Jinwoo, the impact blasting apart the pavement and sending violent tremors through the ground. Beck's eyes widened. He had witnessed countless battles, but nothing like this. So that was the magical beast reported in the chaos. And the man fighting it so overwhelmingly could only be Thomas Andre, the Goliath. A mix of awe and fear gripped Beck as he shouted encouragement toward the towering hunter. But Thomas didn't even glance back. His voice thundered across the battlefield, sharp and commanding. Take cover. All of you. The warning was absolute. Rockin rose slowly, jaws parted, murderous intent pouring from him like a tangible mist. His presence alone suffocated the air. Hunters nearby felt their legs weaken under the crushing weight of his magic power. Beck's instincts screamed. This wasn't an ordinary monster. This wasn't even comparable to past calamities. The primal beast within him, his sharpened sixth sense, recognized it immediately. This was a predator, and he was prey. As that realization settled in, Rockin vanished. In the next instant, the Beast Monarch stood directly before Beck. Beck froze. His heart hammered violently in his chest, but he couldn't lift his gaze. The sheer pressure radiating from Rockin's body was overwhelming, far beyond anything Beck had experienced in the last decade. Rockin walked past him. That alone made Beck tremble. He had been spared, not out of mercy, but because he wasn't worth the effort. Then Rockin extended his claws. The air distorted. With a mysterious ability, gravity itself seemed to collapse inward. Cars tore free from the pavement. Lampposts bent and ripped from their foundations. Fire hydrants, benches, chunks of asphalt. All of it rose into the air, suspended by an invisible force. And then, they launched. Metal and debris shot forward like a storm of missiles, shredding through dust and concrete alike. Yet within the chaos, Thomas Andre stood firm. As vehicles hurtled toward him, he kicked them aside effortlessly, his focus never wavering. His massive frame cut through the flying wreckage like an immovable fortress. Then Thomas activated his own ability. Gravitation. The air trembled violently as his power surged outward. The invisible force clashed against Rockin's control, overpowering it. And in a split second, the Beast Monarch was dragged straight toward him. Rockin's snarling face closed the distance instantly. Thomas didn't hesitate. Demolish. His ultimate technique ignited. Muscles swelled grotesquely, veins bulging across his arms as raw power condensed into both fists. The very ground beneath him cracked from the pressure. With a roar, Thomas raised his fists high and brought them down. The blow was catastrophic. A thunderous shockwave erupted outward, flattening everything in its path. The force drove Rockin deep into the earth, carving a crater into the battlefield as if struck by a falling meteor. For a moment, the world itself seemed to shake from the collision of their power. Thomas gave him no room to recover. He hurled himself into the crater and began raining down blows, each punch fueled by the full force of his skill. Heavy strikes crashed into Rockin's body with sickening thuds. His fists fell like war hammers, the shockwaves stacking atop one another as the ground split further beneath them. Again, and again, and again. From a distance, it looked like total domination. But something was wrong. A thin line of sweat rolled down Thomas Andre's temple. His massive frame trembled, not from fatigue, but from a feeling he couldn't explain. An instinct. A warning buried deep in his gut. He was landing every strike. Rakan wasn't resisting. Yet the unease only grew stronger. Then Thomas saw it. Rakan's eyes. Cold. Still. Unchanged. There was no desperation in them. No pain. No fear. Only a calm, disturbing patience. Rage surged through Thomas. With a roar, he raised both fists high into the air, preparing to end it in a single crushing blow. He brought them down with everything he had. And stopped. Rakan had caught the strike. With one hand. The impact that should have obliterated him barely made him flinch. Thomas's fists were locked in place, gripped effortlessly by the Beast Monarch's palm. For the first time, disbelief flickered across the Goliath's face. Then it began. Rakan's transformation. His black hair bleached into a savage white, growing longer and wilder as it whipped around him. His frame expanded, muscles tightening beneath skin that split into coarse white fur. Nails elongated into lethal claws. Teeth sharpened into predatory fangs. The air itself seemed to recoil. Thomas, still frozen in shock, stared at the creature before him. This wasn't the same opponent. This was something far worse. Without warning, Rakan moved. His claws blurred through the air, carving into Thomas with merciless speed. Flesh tore. Blood sprayed. The force of the strikes drove the massive hunter backward. A roar of pain thundered across the battlefield. For the first time, one of the world's strongest hunters cried out. Thomas tried to guard, tried to counter, but the assault was overwhelming. Each slash came faster than the last, shredding through defense and pride alike. Rakan raised his claw again, and paused. Something had entered his senses. From the swirling dust and fractured shadows, a familiar presence moved silently across the battlefield. A shadow ant. It crept forward through the chaos, unnoticed by the others, but not by a monarch. Rakan's head snapped toward it instantly. In a single motion, he seized the creature by the neck and lifted it effortlessly into the air, its limbs twitching helplessly in his grip. His feral grin widened. The battlefield had just grown far more interesting. Rakan studied the shadow ant in his grasp, golden eyes narrowing with faint curiosity. The creature struggled soundlessly, its body flickering like unstable smoke. The Beast Monarch tightened his grip. The ant shattered, its shadowy form dispersing into nothing. Rakan dismissed it as insignificant and turned back to his true prey. Thomas Andre was on one knee now, chest heaving, blood running down his battered frame. Still, he refused to fall completely. Rakan closed the distance in a blur and seized Thomas by the throat, lifting him slightly as his lips curled into a cruel smile. His voice dripped with mockery as he invited the Goliath to test his strength, if he still had any left. But Thomas Andre did not yield. With a surge of stubborn defiance, he twisted his body and slipped behind the Beast Monarch, locking one massive arm around Rakan's neck. Veins bulged as he tightened the hold, pouring every ounce of strength into the choke. His mind screamed one command. End this. For a moment, it seemed possible. Then Rakan's eyes turned cold. The Beast Monarch flexed. A sickening crack echoed through the battlefield. Thomas didn't register it at first, adrenaline still numbing his senses. But a split second later, agony erupted through him like fire. Rakan had shattered the arm wrapped around his neck. A raw, involuntary scream tore from Thomas's throat as his strength failed him. The grip loosened instantly. Rakan grabbed him by the head. The Goliath, once an immovable force, was lifted like a rag doll and driven violently into the ground. The impact shook the earth, carving deeper fractures into the already ruined battlefield. Before Thomas could recover, Rakan leaped onto him, pinning him down. One clawed hand clamped around his skull, iron tight. A twisted grin spread across the monarch's face as he spoke, voice low and predatory, hinting at hunger, at consumption. Thomas Andre, the towering symbol of human strength, lay broken beneath him. Rakan raised his claw to finish it. And then, a surge of magical energy split the air. A concentrated blast struck the Beast Monarch square in the face, detonating on impact. The force was powerful enough to tear him off Thomas and send him skidding backward across the fractured pavement. Dust and debris swirled again. The battle was not over. The blast that tore Rocken away from Thomas had come from afar. It was Leonard. The German hunter lowered his hand slowly, eyes burning with determination as he stepped forward. Though his heart pounded violently against his ribs, he forced his feet to move. He positioned himself beside the fallen Thomas Andre, placing his body between the Beast Monarch and the wounded Goliath. Every instinct screamed at him to run. The pressure in the air was suffocating. His skin prickled. A cold sweat gathered along his spine. But he did not move. He couldn't allow the creature to slaughter Thomas, not while he still stood. Thomas, barely conscious, recognized the silhouette standing over him. "Run," he rasped, his voice broken and weak. "You'll die." The warning carried no pride, only truth. Leonard trembled, yet he shook his head, even knowing the gap in power, even knowing death was almost certain. In his heart, he had already chosen. A meaningless survival was worse than a proud end. If this was the final moment of his life, he would face it standing. He repeated those thoughts in his mind, over and over, trying to drown out the fear clawing at him. Then Rocken stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. His jaws spread wide, rows of fangs glinting as murderous intent flooded the battlefield once more. The closer he came, the more Leonard's resolve began to fracture. The weight of death became real, oppressively real. His breathing faltered. His vision trembled. For the first time, doubt struck him. Was this truly courage, or simply suicide? Rocken lunged. Leonard froze. His body refused to obey. The Beast Monarch's jaws opened, ready to tear him apart, and a violent gust of wind tore across the battlefield. A thunderous impact exploded just ahead of Leonard. His eyes snapped open in shock. Rocken, who had been mere seconds from ending him, was suddenly blasted away, hurled dozens of meters through the air as if struck by a charging mountain. The massive body tumbled across the shattered ground. A colossal shadow descended from above. Kaisel, the shadow dragon, had entered the fray. With overwhelming force, Kaisel's enormous jaws had clamped onto Rocken and dragged him clear from Leonard's position, tearing the Beast Monarch away from his prey. Leonard stood frozen, disbelief flooding his features. Relief followed. He watched as Rocken struggled briefly in midair, suspended within the dragon's crushing grip. But then, Kaisel's shadowy form began to flicker. The great dragon dissolved into black mist, its presence fading as swiftly as it had appeared. The air stilled once more. Rocken landed lightly upon the fractured earth, and he was smiling. Rocken's golden eyes tracked the dispersing shadows, instinct sharpening. Something was descending. The air split. From above, Sung Jinwoo dropped like a falling blade, silent, precise, unstoppable. His body twisted midair with flawless control, and in one fluid motion, he delivered a crushing leg kick straight down onto Rocken's head. The impact detonated. The Beast Monarch was driven into the pavement as the ground caved beneath him. Asphalt shattered outward in a violent web of cracks. Nearby cars were shoved aside as though caught in a shockwave, and streetlights bent under the pressure. Jinwoo landed lightly beside Leonard, coat fluttering as the dust swirled around him. Calm, composed, as if he had merely stepped into place. Leonard stared at him, stunned, his mind struggling to process the sudden reversal. Seconds ago, he had been staring death in the face. Now the battlefield belonged to someone else. Without raising his voice, Jinwoo spoke. "Help him." He gestured toward Thomas Andre. Leonard snapped back to reality and quickly moved to support the wounded Goliath. Together, they lifted him carefully, retreating from the epicenter of destruction as fast as they could. Jinwoo did not look back. His gaze remained fixed ahead. Rocken. The Beast Monarch began to rise from the debris, chunks of broken asphalt sliding from his shoulders. Killing intent rolled off him in suffocating waves. But Jinwoo felt something else too. Not just Rocken. Another presence lingered at the edge of his perception. His eyes darkened. The rubble shifted, and Rocken finally stood fully revealed once more. Despite the brutal strike he had taken, his posture remained steady. He rolled something in his mouth, then spat. Fragments of broken teeth scattered across the ground. A sneer twisted his face as his gaze locked onto Jinwoo. This time, there was no dismissal in his eyes. No amusement. Only recognition. Rockin's voice echoed low and hostile as realization dawned upon him. He could feel it clearly now, the power coiled within the human before him. The Shadow Monarch. The presence was unmistakable. Rockin's expression hardened with fury. To him, Jin Woo was no longer a mere hunter. He was an anomaly, a human who had seized the power of a superior being. And that made him far more dangerous than any prey. The battlefield grew still. Two monarchs now stood face to face. Jinwoo and Rockin stood locked in silence, killing intent colliding invisibly between them. Then, a new voice cut through the air. Cold, detached, malicious. The temperature dropped as the Frost Monarch materialized beside Rockin, his pale gaze fixed on Jinwoo. With quiet certainty, he confirmed what Rockin had sensed. The Shadow Monarch's power within Jinwoo was no coincidence. It had been arranged, part of a pact with an administrator. This outcome had been planned. The revelation only thickened the tension in the air. Before Jinwoo could respond, the ground beneath the city trembled. From the sewer grates and fractured asphalt, a tide of insects began pouring out. The sound came first, a suffocating buzz of thousands upon thousands of wings. They swarmed together in a writhing mass, rising and condensing into a single towering figure. The Queen of Insects, the Plague Monarch. Her many eyes gleamed with twisted curiosity as they locked onto Jinwoo. Excitement laced her voice as she wondered aloud what it might feel like to devour another monarch. Now there were three: the Beast Monarch, the Frost Monarch, the Plague Monarch. System notifications flickered before Jinwoo's eyes in rapid succession. Each monarch has designated you as their enemy. The black heart within his chest reacted violently, pounding with thunderous force. Power surged through his veins, awakening every nerve in his body. His entire being thrummed with life, with battle. Despite the odds, Jinwoo smiled. It was small, cold. With a single command, he summoned them. Arise. Shadows exploded outward across the battlefield. From beneath broken asphalt, from beneath wrecked vehicles, from every darkened corner, his army rose. An ocean of black steel and crimson eyes surrounded him. The Frost Monarch remained calm as Igris, the loyal Crimson Knight, charged straight toward him. At his side, iron thundered forward, both shadows moving in perfect coordination for a joint strike. Elsewhere, Tank and Jima roared as they hurled themselves at Rockin, claws and fangs bared. The ant soldiers advanced in disciplined waves toward the Plague Monarch, their unified movement shaking the air. Rockin let out a low growl of amusement at the sight of the vast shadow army. Surprise flickered briefly across his savage expression, tinged with curiosity. But the Frost Monarch did not react. He stepped forward slowly, almost elegantly. Then he inhaled. The air crystallized in his lungs. And when he exhaled, a blizzard was born. A bone-chilling wind swept across the battlefield, howling like the breath of death itself. Frost spread instantly in its wake. Asphalt froze solid. Vehicles became encased in ice. Shadows slowed as layers of crystal formed over their limbs. Everything the wind touched froze. The battlefield transformed into a frozen graveyard in seconds. The street that moments ago roared with the march of shadows had become a frozen graveyard. Ice stretched in every direction. Cars locked in crystal, buildings rimed with frost. Jinwoo's entire shadow army sealed mid-charge inside translucent prisons. Crimson eyes flickered faintly beneath layers of ice, but none could move. The storm reached Jinwoo last. The Frost Monarch's breath tore toward him like a living blizzard. The cold wasn't natural. It gnawed, invaded, sought to devour. With lightning reflexes, Jinwoo raised his daggers, Kamish's wrath blazing darkly in his grip, and crossed them before him. Steel met frost. The impact screamed. Ice exploded outward as he carved through the incoming wave, boots grinding against the frozen asphalt. The cold bit at his skin, trying to force him backward, but he held firm, refusing to yield a single step. Across the battlefield, the Frost Monarch watched calmly. Small fries, he said, voice echoing through the crystalline wasteland. To him, the immobilized shadows were insignificant, frozen statues incapable of even twitching within his domain. His gaze was filled with disdain as he mocked Jinwoo's attempt to oppose the monarchs with such toys. Beside him, Croatia, the Plague Monarch, tilted her head slightly, observing the trapped ant soldiers with unsettling fondness. She spoke almost gently, lamenting the sight of her insect children caught in the frost. It was not grief. It was curiosity. The Frost Monarch ignored her sentiment and continued, his voice sharpened with ridicule. A mere human daring to believe he had inherited the Shadow Monarch's full power? Absurd. Even if the Shadow Monarch had once been the greatest among them, that did not mean this vessel could stand equal to true monarchs. The frozen air trembled with their arrogance. But Jinwoo's anger did not cool. If anything, it burned hotter. His eyes locked onto the Frost Monarch. The others faded from his focus. He tightened his grip on Kamish's wrath and lifted the blade, pointing it directly at the Monarch of Ice. "I'll kill you," he said. His voice was low, absolute. The Frost Monarch's expression darkened. His shoulder, the wound Jin Woo had inflicted earlier, throbbed beneath the ice. Rage flickered in his pale eyes. With a sharp motion of his hands, the frozen ground responded. Ice cracked. From beneath the battlefield, colossal figures began to rise. Golems forged of ice and stone, towering giants with jagged limbs and hollow, glowing eyes. Each step they took shook the frozen street. At the same time, Croatia whistled. The sound was shrill, inhuman. Across the battlefield, corpses began to move. Lifeless bodies twitched violently. Bones cracked and rearranged with grotesque snaps. Flesh tore and reshaped itself. Limbs split and multiplied. Within seconds, the dead had become monstrous, four-legged abominations, human spider hybrids that skittered across the ice with horrifying speed. They surged toward Jin Woo in a writhing wave. But his reaction was faster. Before the first creature could reach him, his figure blurred. A flash of black. Steel sang through frozen air. The nearest spider abomination was cleaved in two mid-leap, its shattered form dissolving into shadowed fragments before it even touched the ground. Jin Woo moved again, vanishing, reappearing, carving through the swarm in fluid arcs of lethal precision. The battlefield, once frozen in stillness, was alive again. And at its center stood a single human, facing three monarchs without retreat. Time slowed. Jinwoo's twin daggers, Kamish's wrath, whispered through the frozen air with flawless precision. Each spider abomination that lunged toward him was split cleanly in half before it could even register the strike. Bodies fell in neat, bisected halves, dissolving across the ice. A massive ice golem loomed over him, its colossal foot rising to crush him into the frozen street. Too slow. Jinwoo vanished. In less than a heartbeat, he reappeared atop the giant's back. One clean horizontal slash. The golem's head separated perfectly down the middle. The towering body collapsed in a thunderous crash, shattering into jagged shards that scattered across the battlefield. Two more golems lunged simultaneously, claws sweeping inward to tear him apart. Jinwoo had already moved. A blur. A piercing dash. He drove straight through both constructs with explosive force. Cracks spiderwebbed across their bodies before they detonated into countless fragments of ice and stone. Without pause, Jinwoo activated Ruler's authority. The invisible force seized him and launched him forward like a fired bullet, rocketing straight toward the Frost Monarch. The sudden acceleration caught the Monarch off guard. Jinwoo appeared before him in an instant, daggers poised for a killing strike. Steel descended and was intercepted. A powerful wrist blocked the blade at the final moment. It was the Beast Monarch. Rakan stood between them, confidence gleaming in his savage eyes, certain that no mere weapon could pierce his flesh. He was wrong. Kamish's wrath sliced cleanly through his wrist. The severed hand spun through the air, spraying dark fluid across the frozen street. Rakan roared in disbelief, staring at the stump where his hand had been. This was no ordinary blade. Before Rakan could react further, Jin Woo sensed another surge of killing intent. He looked up. The Plague Monarch's fist, infused with violent magical power, crashed toward him. Jin Woo twisted aside at the last possible instant. Her punch struck the ground instead. The shockwave obliterated the remaining spider abominations nearby, erasing them in a violent burst of force. Croatia straightened, a menacing aura coiling around her as she prepared to strike again. Behind them, Rakan calmly lifted his severed wrist. Tendons writhed, bone reformed, flesh fused seamlessly back together. Within seconds, his arm was whole again. Jinwoo exhaled slowly. So it would be that kind of battle. Around him, chaos intensified. The Frost Monarch's remaining golems advanced in heavy strides. Newly twisted corpses scuttled across the ice under the Plague Monarch's command. Rockin flexed his regenerated hand, baring his fangs as he moved forward once more. 3 monarchs. An army of constructs and abominations. All converging at once. Then, crack. Ice shattered behind Jinwoo. A violent surge of power erupted outward. My king, Beru, burst free from his frozen prison, shards exploding around him. His wings roared as he entered an emergency state, every instinct consumed by one purpose. Protect the king. He launched into the sky at blinding speed, streaking toward Jinwoo so fast that even the monarchs were momentarily stunned. His piercing cry tore through the streets of Seoul, shaking the frozen wasteland itself. The Frost Monarch's eyes widened in disbelief. A shadow soldier had broken his binding spell. And not just any soldier. A commander-level entity. The Beast Monarch narrowed his eyes, recognizing the magnitude of Beru's presence. He understood what stood before them. A being forged for destruction. To see such a creature kneeling to a human was deeply unsettling. Only the Plague Monarch remained unfazed. She regarded Beru with cold disdain. A rebellious child, she murmured. Stretching out her hand, she unleashed a binding force, attempting to seize him mid-flight and crush him like an insect. But Beru did not hesitate. With savage determination and impossible speed, he darted straight toward her outstretched hand, his claws poised, his aura blazing with unyielding loyalty. The collision was inevitable. Beru moved on instinct. With a deafening screech, he tore straight through the Plague Monarch's outstretched hand. Chitin and flesh split apart under his claws, shredded as though made of paper. The force of the strike sent fragments scattering across the frozen battlefield. For a brief second, even the monarchs were stunned. Beru wasted no time. He pivoted midair and returned to Jinwoo's side, landing smoothly before dropping to one knee. My king. His voice carried fierce admiration, pride blazing in his crimson eyes. To Beru, Jinwoo's strength was absolute, divine even. But Jinwoo barely acknowledged it. The corpses around them were already moving again. Twisted bodies skittered across the ice, racing forward with unnatural speed. Beru shifted instantly, claws flashing as he ripped through the incoming abominations, tearing them apart before they could close the distance. Then, a shadow fell. Jinwoo turned just as a massive palm descended. The Plague Monarch had struck. The blow hit like a collapsing mountain. Jinwoo was swatted aside and hurled into the side of a nearby building. Concrete exploded on impact, the entire structure trembling as cracks raced along its walls. The shockwave rippled outward, rattling the frozen cityscape. Jinwoo pushed himself from the rubble. Pain radiated through his body. His breath came heavy. The world spun briefly, ears ringing, vision blurring. But there was no time to recover. He looked up. The sky was filled with death. Thousands of ice arrows hovered overhead, perfectly aligned and aimed directly at him. The Frost Monarch's handiwork. They fell. Jinwoo moved. His body blurred through the hailstorm, daggers flashing as he deflected, split, and evaded the incoming barrage. To onlookers, he seemed to vanish and reappear between impacts, his movements too fast for the eye to track. The Frost Monarch watched with narrowed eyes, impressed despite himself. How long? He taunted coldly. Can a human withstand this? He never finished the thought. A sudden, sharp pain pierced his chest. His breath hitched. Looking down, he saw it. A dagger buried deep within his body. Shock flooded his pale face. Jinwoo stood before him, silent, unwavering. I told you, Jinwoo said calmly. You won't leave this battlefield alive. Fury ignited in the Frost Monarch's veins. How could a mere human wound a monarch? The dagger vanished in a swirl of shadow and returned to Jinwoo's hand, recalled instantly after piercing the monarch's heart. The wound bled, but it was not fatal. Not to beings like them. Jinwoo already knew that. He spun Kamish wrath into a reverse grip and launched forward without hesitation. A storm of steel erupted. His blades carved through the air in rapid succession, leaving streaks of darkness and slicing arcs of pressure that forced the Frost Monarch backward. Ice barriers rose and shattered. Frost-coated defenses cracked under the relentless assault. The clash rang across the battlefield, metal against magic, shadow against winter. Jinwoo's speed defied expectation. But he was not alone. Behind him, Beru's wings thundered once more as the commander surged forward, aura blazing, ready to strike alongside his king. And elsewhere, shadows within the frozen prison began to tremble. The battle was shifting. Behind him, Rakan, the Beast Monarch, matched Jinwoo step for step, silent and predatory. In one fluid motion, he summoned his weapon and waited for the perfect opening. When it came, he struck without mercy. The blade tore across Jinwoo's back, the force of the blow driving him forward. Blood spilled from Jinwoo's lips as he staggered, nearly collapsing under the sheer power of the attack. From afar, Beru witnessed it all in horror. His king had been wounded, and he could do nothing. The plague monarch, Quresha, held him firmly beneath her foot, her crushing weight pinning him to the frozen ground. No matter how fiercely he struggled, he could not break free. With chilling pride, Quresha introduced herself as the queen of insects, the mother of every crawling creature in existence. Even as Beru glared at her in fury, she dismissed his defiance. To her, he was still one of her children. Beru roared in frustration, but rage alone could not free him. He was forced to watch as Jin Woo struggled to rise. Rakan lifted his weapon once more, intent on ending the battle. Jin Woo was on one knee, steadying himself after the devastating strike. The Beast Monarch prepared to deliver the final blow. Then Beru's desperation turned into a thunderous cry. Calling out to the other shadow soldiers, he summoned them to defend their lord. The frozen battlefield trembled. Ice cracked and splintered, and from beneath it, a pair of glowing red eyes ignited in the darkness. Greed emerged first. With a violent surge of power, he shattered the ice that bound him and stepped forward, his massive frame radiating menace. He was no ordinary shadow. Once a warrior of immense strength, he now stood ready to annihilate anything that threatened his king. Rakan paused, assessing the new threat. He recognized the aura immediately. This was a shadow forged from true power. Elsewhere across the battlefield, more ice ruptured. High-ranking shadows, Greed, Igris, Tusk, broke free one after another. Their roars rolled like thunder, signaling a shift in the tide of war. The Frost Monarch observed Jinwoo closely. The earlier strike had appeared fatal. By all logic, the fight should have been nearing its conclusion. Yet Jinwoo rose. A faint smirk touched his lips, his icy gaze unwavering. Before the monarch's eyes, his wounds began to close. Flesh mended. Blood vanished. It was as though the damage had never existed. In a calm, controlled voice, Jinwoo activated his ability, status effect recovery. The injuries that had nearly ended him dissolved completely. Restored and resolute, he stood tall once more, facing the monarchs with renewed dominance. At that very moment, chaos rippled across the world. In cities like New York, London, Shanghai, and Paris, people froze in place, eyes fixed on screens broadcasting the catastrophe in Seoul. The colossal gate that had appeared over Korea had already shaken the globe, but now the live images of Jinwoo confronting the monarchs sent shockwaves through humanity. Among the few capable of perceiving the battle directly was Leonard. Watching from nearby, he could feel the surge of Jinwoo's power firsthand. And as that power rose, it became clear the battle was far from over. Wounded and surrounded by healers, Thomas Andre demanded to know what was happening. But even Leonard, who stood close enough to witness the clash, struggled to explain it. What unfolded before him felt less like a battle and more like the end of the world. A violent storm spiraling around Jinwoo, far beyond the understanding of ordinary humans. As Leonard watched, a chilling realization struck him. The Jinwoo he once knew was gone. The hunter who had steadily climbed the ranks had transformed into something else entirely. His growth in such a short span of time defied logic. From another vantage point, Beck observed in stunned silence. He had always believed Jinwoo possessed limitless potential, but even he had never imagined this level of power. What stood on that battlefield was no longer just a promising hunter. It was something far greater. Meanwhile, Beru finally broke free from the plague monarch's grasp. In one swift motion, he severed her grotesque nails, forcing a furious snarl from her lips. Enraged, she lunged at him without hesitation. But she failed to notice Jinwoo standing directly behind her, daggers drawn, eyes blazing. For a fleeting instant, Jinwoo's thoughts returned to the prophecies spoken by the Creator, that he would one day die by a pillar of flames holding up the world. Yet there was one truth the prophecy had left unanswered, whether he would truly fall. Clenching his teeth, Jinwoo tightened his grip. Then he struck. His daggers became streaks of light, carving into the plague monarch with ruthless precision. Each blow landed with merciless force, metal tearing through flesh in a relentless barrage. Wounds blossomed across her body as he pressed forward, his fury unleashed without restraint. While their clash shook the battlefield, Seoul burned beneath waves of destruction. From afar, Lim Taejae watched the inferno with a heavy heart. For years, he had trusted his role as a sniper, strike at the decisive moment, from the perfect distance. Around the perimeter, the elite assassins of the Fiend Guild lay in wait atop buildings, ready to unleash supporting fire at his command. But doubt gripped him. Even if they intervened, how many would survive? The enemy they faced was not an ordinary foe. Not even Thomas Andre, the strongest hunter, had been able to subdue such a being. Lim's thoughts spiraled. Was it worth risking everything for a battle they might not influence at all? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as heavily as the smoke-filled sky. Then, a cold hand settled on his shoulder. The sudden touch jolted him from his thoughts. His heart thundered as he sensed a presence behind him, unseen, yet unmistakably there. A voice whispered near his ear, calm and commanding, telling him to simply sit back and watch. Instinct took over. He spun around, arrow already drawn, bowstring taut, and ready to fire. His voice quivered as he demanded to know who was there. But there was no one. The rooftop stood empty. No footsteps. No shadow. No trace of another presence. Only silence answered him. The battle unfolding between Jinwoo and the Monarchs had long surpassed human comprehension. Those watching could neither interfere nor fully grasp what they were witnessing. All they could do was wait, instinctively aware that the end was approaching. The plague monarch's mutilated body began to writhe. Maggots churned beneath torn flesh, binding together in a grotesque dance of restoration. Limbs reformed, skin sealed. Within moments, she stood whole again, as though Jinwoo's relentless assault had never happened. The sight alone was enough to freeze the blood. Without pause, she retaliated. A violent surge of poisonous magic erupted outward, flooding the battlefield with a suffocating miasma. The air itself turned lethal. Jin Woo did not flinch. A system message flashed before his eyes. Venom effects detected in the atmosphere. Another followed almost instantly. Detoxification successfully completed. Poison held no dominion over him. The plague monarch's fury spiraled into madness. Her body twisted and expanded, transforming into a monstrous insectoid form. Massive mandibles snapped open as she lunged forward, determined to tear him apart. Before she could reach him, Jinwoo raised a hand. Ruler's authority. An invisible force crushed down upon her. Her charge halted mid-motion, her colossal body suspended in place as if pinned by the will of a god. No matter how she strained, she could not break free. Her teeth ground together in fury, but Jinwoo's control was absolute. With a flick of his hand, she was hurled back. Jinwoo moved instantly. Mutilation. His daggers blurred into streaks of black light. A dark aura engulfed the blades as they carved into her over and over again. Kamesh's wrath pulsed with ominous energy, slicing through flesh without resistance. Each strike tore deeper than the last. Her screams echoed across the battlefield. Jinwoo did not hesitate. He did not slow. He stripped away her monstrous body piece by piece, until nothing remained but fragments dissolving into shadow. As her existence crumbled, a strange calm settled over her. In her fading consciousness, she sensed something vast, an all-consuming darkness far more profound than death itself. And in her final breath, she found herself awed by its brilliance. A notification appeared. You have defeated one of the 9 monarchs, Quresha, the plague monarch. Then, you have leveled up. Messages cascaded one after another. From a distance, the frost monarch trembled. Disbelief laced his voice. This should have been impossible. Jinwoo had only recently inherited the shadow monarch's power. How could he wield it to such terrifying heights already? The ancient fear once associated with the Shadow Monarch was rising again. But beside him, the Beast Monarch merely scoffed. With a cruel grin, he seized Beru by the neck, lifting him effortlessly. His grip tightened, dismissing the Frost Monarch's anxiety. To him, Jinwoo's reliance on his shadow soldiers was proof of weakness. An incomplete monarch, he seemed to imply, can never rival the true ones. Beru shrieked in agony. His body flickered violently, his existence destabilizing. Jinwoo's eyes widened. The sensation was familiar. Beru's life force was being drained, just as the shadow placed on Thomas Andre had once been forcibly removed. Jin Woo attempted to recall him. The system answered coldly. Return impossible. For a split second, panic surged through him. Then his expression hardened. Without hesitation, Jin Woo charged. In a burst of overwhelming force, he struck the Beast Monarch with devastating power. The impact sent the towering figure flying across the battlefield, his grip on Beru broken at last. Beru fell free. Though Jin Woo had saved him from extinction, the cost of the battle weighed heavily on his shoulders. The war was not over, and the true storm was only beginning. The Frost Monarch's body began to expand, rising higher and higher as a towering glacier formed around him. Frost gathered in the air, and icy vapor spilled from his lips as he looked down at Jin Woo with open disdain. To him, Jinwoo's confidence was laughable. The power he wielded, though immense, had not yet matured under a true master. With a slow, deliberate motion, the Frost Monarch unsheathed his weapon, an otherworldly trident emanating a chilling, ancient aura. Its very presence seemed to freeze the air. No matter how tightly Jin Woo controlled his shadow soldiers, the monarch declared, he would simply cut the strings that bound them. He would trap them in eternal frost, forcing them into endless cycles of destruction and restoration, draining Jinwoo's mana until nothing remained. They would become parasites feeding on their own king. Then he attacked. The trident cleaved through the air, coated in lethal ice energy. Jin Woo crossed his daggers to block, but the impact was overwhelming. The blade grazed his shoulder, slicing deep. Blood spilled instantly, staining his clothes as pain surged through him. The Frost Monarch pressed on. With fluid precision, he spun through the air and brought the trident crashing down where Jin Woo had stood. The ground shattered beneath the blow, ice erupting outward in violent shockwaves. But Jin Woo had already vanished. Reappearing in a flash, he aimed directly for the monarch's eyes. His dagger streaked forward with deadly intent. The Frost Monarch reacted at the last instant, tilting his head just enough to avoid blindness. He countered immediately. The strike landed squarely on Jin Woo's torso. The force was catastrophic. Jin Woo felt his ribs crack as blood burst from his mouth. He was hurled across the battlefield, smashing into the asphalt and carving a trench through the ground before managing to halt his momentum. He steadied himself, breathing heavily, body screaming in protest. Yet even through the pain, he observed the monarch's speed, his rhythm, the flow of mana through each movement. The Frost Monarch advanced, relentless and cold. He sensed Jinwoo's injuries and sought to finish the battle quickly. Their weapons collided again and again, metal ringing sharply in the frozen air. Sparks and shards of ice scattered with every clash. Jinwoo's focus sharpened to its limit. If he could move just slightly faster, if he could predict even a fraction sooner, he could seize control of the fight. But the Frost Monarch's confidence never wavered. In his mind, this outcome had already been decided. Gripping his trident with both hands, he unleashed a devastating storm of ice. The ground split open as glacial energy tore across the battlefield in a sweeping wave of destruction. Before it could consume him, Jin Woo disappeared. In less than a heartbeat, he reappeared behind the Frost Monarch. His eyes locked onto his target. This was the opening. He prepared to strike. And then, the Frost Monarch turned his head slightly. A smug smile curved his lips. In that instant, Jinwoo's body froze. An invisible force seized him. His strength drained rapidly, as though something was siphoning his very essence. The battlefield dimmed. Sound faded. His vision blurred at the edges as darkness crept inward. The world itself seemed to fall silent. The onlookers, hunters and soldiers who had gathered at a distance, could only stare in stunned disbelief. They could not comprehend what had just occurred. And for the first time in the battle, Jinwoo's shadow flickered. A sudden, Brutal force erupted through Jinwoo's chest. 5 razor-sharp claws burst from his back, slick with blood. The Beast Monarch had transformed fully, his towering werewolf form looming behind Jinwoo. Muscles bulged beneath coarse fur, and his massive claws had pierced clean through vital points. The strike had been deliberate, fatal. Kamesh's wrath slipped from Jinwoo's weakening grasp, clattering against the shattered ground below. The Beast Monarch leaned closer, tightening his grip. His claws sank deeper into flesh, savoring the moment as blood poured from Jinwoo's mouth. He mocked him openly, belittling the so-called successor of the Shadow Monarch. Jinwoo's body trembled. His level had risen. His strength had grown. By all logic, this battle should have been within reach. But logic meant nothing against this agony. As his consciousness wavered, the Frost Monarch stepped forward. His icy gaze held no mercy. In his hand was Jinwoo's own dagger, now encased in frost. Without hesitation, he drove it into Jinwoo's chest. The blade plunged deep. Blood surged outward, staining the frozen earth. Ice spread from the wound, creeping beneath Jinwoo's skin. The Frost Monarch twisted the dagger slowly, savoring every second. His voice dripped with contempt as he declared that there would be no recovery this time. No healing. No miracle. Jin Woo was incomplete, a mere fragment of the Shadow Monarch. An unfinished existence. As Jin Woo's strength drained away, the Frost Monarch continued speaking, painting a grim vision of the future. He spoke of mountains of corpses and rivers of blood, of humanity erased, of cities reduced to frozen tombs. And for Jinwoo's homeland, he promised something even crueler. Every living being would be encased in eternal ice, unable to live, unable to die. A frozen world locked in endless suffering. The monarch relished the thought. The cold from the dagger spread rapidly. Jinwoo's limbs went numb. His breathing slowed. His senses dulled as darkness swallowed the edges of his vision. His human heart beat once, twice, and then it stopped. Silence. Jinwoo's consciousness drifted into a vast, empty void, cold and boundless. A message echoed through the darkness. The player's HP has reached 0. The player has died. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, another notification appeared. The player possesses the Black Heart. A new window opened within the abyss. All requirements for a passive skill have been fulfilled. His skill list flickered and updated, symbols shifting as something ancient stirred deep within him. In the emptiness of death, an unknown force awakened. The darkness around him was no longer empty. It pulsed. Even in death, Jinwoo's story had not reached its end. It had only just begun.